The call came at exactly 9:03 that morning. "Dad, the Boston mansion has been sold," my daughter said. "The money is already in my account. The nursing home van will be there this afternoon." Then my son-in-law added, "You signed the power of attorney last year. Everything is legal." For a moment I stared out the window of the small cottage where I had been recovering from eye surgery. They thought a 60-year-old widower with failing eyesight had no choice left but surrender. What they didn't know was that I had been waiting months for this phone call, and my late wife had made sure I wouldn't be facing it unprepared. Take a breath with me before we begin. Before we dive in, leave a quick comment. Have you ever had to protect yourself from someone you trusted? Just yes or no. Your perspective might help someone reading this today. Quick note, some details are adjusted for storytelling, but the lesson at the heart of this is what matters most. The call would come at 9:03 in the morning. I had calculated the window down to a 17-minute margin, and I had been right about harder things than the timing of my own daughter's betrayal. I sat in the dim front room of Walden Cottage wearing sunglasses indoors, despite perfectly restored vision, watching live footage from Oakmont Estate's southern pasture, where Galileo grazed under Kentucky morning sun. The horse moved peacefully across 1,700 miles of satellite feed, unaware that his future and mine hung on what would happen in the next 16 minutes. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. The encrypted phone sat 3 inches from my right hand. Clarence Hewitt, 60 years old, and 3 years a widower, waiting for the phone to ring. I had been staring at that screen for 43 minutes, not because I needed to watch the horses, because I needed to remember what I was protecting. Celeste had spent 15 years building Oakmont from bare Kentucky soil into something that mattered. $52 million in equity unencumbered, 216 acres, 37 retired thoroughbreds living out their years on grass that Celeste had seeded herself, because she said the commercial blends didn't smell right. She used to say I calculated everything except the things that mattered. She was wrong about that. I calculated those most of all. The cottage, a temporary safe house 23 miles west of our Beacon Hill townhouse, contained nothing of my real life except the laptop and the phone. No photographs, no books, nothing that would suggest the man sitting here had spent 31 years managing systemic risk assessments at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston before retiring to help his wife run a horse sanctuary in Kentucky. The cottage was sterile by design. A stage set for the role I had been performing for 8 months, confused elderly man recovering from cataract surgery, vision-compromised judgment, declining vulnerable. 8 months of preparation compressed into the 17 minutes before my phone would ring and my daughter would tell me she had sold my life out from under me. I adjusted the sunglasses. The gesture was automatic now. I had worn them every day since the surgery in March, even though Dr. Simone Reyes had restored my vision to 2015 by week 7. But Ondine didn't know that. Neither did Thatcher Garrett, the real estate attorney she had married 6 years ago. Smooth voice, courtroom, smile, and a Connecticut case file I had found 4 months into my research, showing he had done this before. Celeste had died 3 years ago. 11 days before, Thatcher made his first phone call to a guardianship specialist. I had been standing at her grave in the November rain, unable to leave, asking her what I should do. He had been at his desk making plans. The encrypted phone buzzed at exactly 9:03 a.m. I let it ring once, twice. On the third ring I answered, tapped the speaker button, and said nothing. "Dad," Ondine's voice filled the cottage. 34 years old, PhD in behavioral economics from MIT, and she had learned to use intelligence as both weapon and shield. "Dad, it's Ondine. Thatcher's here with me." "Good morning," I said, neutral tone, slightly slow cadence. The voice of a man whose processing speed had declined. Thatcher spoke next, his attorney voice smooth and certain. "Clarence, I'm calling with an update on your care arrangements. The Beacon Hill property closed this morning, $4.2 million. The funds have been transferred to a secured account under Ondine's name for your ongoing care needs. The power of attorney you signed 3 years ago allows her to make these financial decisions on your behalf as we discussed." I said nothing. Let the silence extend 3 seconds. 4. "Dad." Ondine again, softer now. "St. Jude Gardens is really nice. They have a courtyard, activities, a full medical staff. This is better for you than trying to manage on your own. The transport van will be there at 2 o'clock this afternoon to help you move your things." "I see," I said. Another pause. I could hear them breathing, waiting for more, waiting for panic, for tears, for the confused questions of a man whose world had just been dismantled. "Thank you for letting me know. I added. Then after a beat, have a good day. I ended the call before either of them could respond. 2 words. That was all I gave them. 2 words when they had expected a symphony of confusion. I set the phone down and returned my eyes to the laptop screen. Galileo, still grazing tail swishing against November, flies unaware that 1,700 miles away, 2 people were sitting in a kitchen trying to understand why a 60-year-old man recovering from eye surgery had just responded to the theft of his life with the emotional inflection of someone confirming a dinner reservation. They had expected panic. They had planned for confusion. What they had received was something they didn't yet have a framework to interpret. I reached for the cold coffee, took a sip, grimaced. On the screen, Galileo moved toward the water trough that Celeste had positioned beneath the old maple because she said horses like to drink in shade. She had been right about that. She had been right about most things, including what our daughter would do when fear and opportunity converged. The real question wasn't why I stayed calm. The real question was what I had been doing for the 8 months since I had opened Celeste's locked file cabinet and found the Connecticut case summary, the annotated power of attorney with her handwritten notes in the margins, and the single sheet of paper with 4 words in her precise script, make them show themselves. I picked up the phone again, dialed from memory. Virgil Blanchard answered on the first ring. It's done, I said. They made the call. 72 hours, Virgil confirmed. I hung up. On the screen, Galileo lifted his head ears forward as if he had heard something I couldn't. Then he returned to grazing patient and unworried, exactly as Celeste had promised he would be. The countdown had started. In 72 hours, my daughter and her husband would understand what they had actually taken, and more importantly, what they hadn't. The coffee had gone cold by the time I let myself think about Celeste. Not the diagnosis, not the funeral, but the afternoon 4 years ago, when she stood in Oakmont's southern pasture and made me promise something I didn't understand until it was too late to ask her what she meant. October 2020. The sky had been that particular Kentucky blue that photographers spend careers trying to capture, and the grass still held summer green, despite the calendar edging toward November. I had flown down from Boston for the weekend, taking the Thursday red-eye because Celeste had said there was something she needed to show me. What she showed me was Galileo. The horse was 3 years old, then a retired racehorse with a bowed tendon that had ended his track career before it properly started. Celeste stood in the middle of the southern pasture, with her hand resting on his neck, her hair still dark brown, no gray yet, blowing in wind that smelled of grass and distance. She had turned 53 that summer. Breast cancer wouldn't be diagnosed for another 8 months. Clarence promised me something, she said, not looking at me. Her eyes stayed on Galileo, watching him graze with the patience horses have when they finally understand they're safe. If anything ever happens to me, don't let anyone sell this place who doesn't love it first. Why would you worry about that now? I asked. Practical question, risk assessor's question, the kind of question that misses the point entirely. Because love isn't a legal instrument, she said. And you're going to need to remember that when the paperwork says something different than what I'm telling you right now. I didn't understand. I asked her to explain. She just smiled, the smile that meant she had calculated something I hadn't caught up to yet, and ran her hand down Galileo's shoulder. The horses know when someone doesn't belong here, she said. They always know. Celeste died 14 months after that afternoon, on a November morning when the grass was still green, and I was standing at her bedside holding promises I hadn't yet learned how to keep. She had been 57, 3 years ago now, though some mornings it felt like 3 days. 11 days after her funeral, Thatcher Garrett made his first phone call to a guardianship attorney. I had been at Celeste's grave that afternoon, standing in rain that wouldn't quit asking her what I should do about our daughter. He had been at his desk in his Cambridge office making plans. I set down the cold coffee and checked my watch. 9:31. 28 minutes since Ondine's call. Time to activate the next sequence. I picked up the encrypted second phone, the one Ondine didn't know existed, because it had never touched the same networks as the devices she monitored and dialed from memory. Virgil Blanchard, at 63 and founder of Boston's most discreet forensic audit firm, answered on the first ring. He had known me since our Federal Reserve days, back when we both spent careers calculating what most people preferred to ignore. They made the call, I said. Silence on his end, not empty silence. The silence of a man running through checklists. Timeline, he asked. 72 hours. Everything's ready on my end, Virgil said. When he said ready, he meant documents, files, filed, accounts, restructured evidence, archived in formats that would survive legal challenge. Virgil didn't do half measures. I know, I said. You want me there Thursday morning? Familyrevengestories. No, let them think I'm alone. Let them think it worked exactly as planned. Another pause. Then, Clarence, you're sure about the timing? I'm sure. 72 hours is tight. It's supposed to be. He didn't argue. That's what 30 years of professional trust buys you, someone who will execute your plan, even when it looks like controlled demolition from the outside. Which I supposed it was. I ended the call and set the phone down next to the first one. On the laptop screen, Galileo had moved to the water trough beneath the southern maple. 8 years old now. The bowed tendon had never bothered him on pasture grass. Celeste had been right about that too. I removed my sunglasses and looked at the laptop screen with eyes that saw every pixel in high definition. 2015 vision. That's what Dr. Simone Reyes had achieved 7 weeks post-surgery, better than I'd had at 40. The cataracts had been real. Age does what it does, but the surgery had corrected them completely by early May. I had continued wearing the sunglasses through summer, through fall, through 8 months of carefully documented visual complaints and missed details and requests for people to repeat themselves. Ondine had watched me fumble with reading menus. Thatcher had watched me squint at documents I could see perfectly. Dr. Reyes, who understood what I was doing and why, because Celeste had been her patient too, had carefully noted continued photosensitivity in my file while privately confirming my vision was flawless. I put the sunglasses back on. The performance wasn't over. It had barely started. 72 hours. That was how long Thatcher had given me to vacate a house I had already quietly stopped owning, in the legal sense that actually mattered. The Beacon Hill townhouse had been titled in a revocable living trust since June, with Oakmont Estate as the primary beneficiary and a private foundation as secondary. The trust documents were filed in Kentucky, not Massachusetts, which meant Thatcher's title search had missed them entirely. He was a real estate attorney. He should have known the difference between surface ownership and actual control. That he didn't was, professionally speaking, the first thing I had assessed about him when Ondine brought him to Thanksgiving dinner 6 years ago. Smart enough to be dangerous, not careful enough to see the edges of his own knowledge. I stood and walked to the window. November light filtered through bare maples. Somewhere, 1,700 miles south, Galileo was drinking from a trough Celeste had positioned, because she said horses liked shade. Somewhere in Cambridge, Thatcher Garrett was probably on the phone with the nursing home confirming transport arrangements for 2 o'clock. He thought he had 72 hours to move an elderly man out of a house. What he actually had was 72 hours before he realized he had been walking on a trapdoor that had been built specifically for his weight. The real question was what I had been building for the 8 months since Virgil first showed me the audit reports in his 22nd floor office overlooking Boston Harbor, the night I finally understood what Celeste had been trying to tell me in that Kentucky pasture. Love isn't a legal instrument, but legal instruments properly constructed can protect what love built. I picked up my coffee, realized it was cold, and poured it down the sink. 72 hours. Time to see if I had calculated correctly. To understand why that Monday morning call didn't catch me off guard, you have to understand what happened one March evening 8 months earlier in a 22nd floor office overlooking Boston Harbor, when my oldest friend spread audit reports across his desk and asked me a question I'd spent 31 years learning how to answer. What outcome are you willing to accept? Warren de Horst, de Bapesparend. Virgil's corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows facing east, and at night the harbor turned black glass interrupted only by navigation lights. I had come without calling ahead, because his voicemail that afternoon used a phrase from our Federal Reserve days. I found something interesting in the quarterly review. Interesting meant actionable. Quarterly review meant come alone. The audit reports covered his desk in 3 neat stacks. Virgil, 63 and still working 16-hour days, had his reading glasses pushed up into silver hair. 3 months of activity, he said, tapping the first stack. Your son-in-law accessing your financial records through the power of attorney. Not frequently enough to trigger alerts, but consistently enough to build a complete picture. Bank statements, investment accounts, property assessments. I picked up the top sheet. Login timestamps from January through March, each during business hours, each accessing a different account. What else? I asked. He hired an appraiser for Oakmont, independent contractor out of Lexington. Report came back at a $52 million, which is accurate. Then 17 phone calls to St. Jude Gardens. Virgil slid a phone log across the desk. Memory care wing. He asked about availability. pricing for full-time supervision, whether they accept patients with visual impairment. I stared at the harbor. A tugboat moved past Long Wharf, running lights reflected in water that looked solid. "He's moving pieces you can't see yet," Virgil said. "Building infrastructure before the actual move. That's not opportunistic greed, that's professional execution." "What do you recommend?" I asked. Virgil leaned back. "I recommend you decide what outcome you're willing to accept." Stop him. "Now we file for POA revocation tomorrow, retain a litigator, burn the bridge with your daughter. If you want something else, we need to talk about what that looks like." I set down the report. Celeste had warned me once to be careful about trusting the wrong people with power over decisions that mattered. I had thought she meant in general. I hadn't realized she meant specifically about the man our daughter would marry 7 months after her funeral. "I want to do what I did for 31 years at the Fed," I said. "Assess the full risk exposure, then engineer the controlled failure." Virgil studied me for 3 seconds. Then he opened his drawer and pulled out a second file, significantly thicker. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, "because I kept digging. I wanted to know if this was his first time." He placed the file in front of me. The tab read, "Garrett T. Greenwich CT, 2018. 6 years ago," Virgil said. "Before he married your daughter, his first wife's father, 71 years old, widowed, living in a Greenwich house worth $1.4 million. Thatcher moved in to help with estate planning after the mother died." I opened the file. Property transfer record, nursing home admission form. Settlement agreement marked confidential. "Same playbook," Virgil continued. "Power of attorney, concerns about declining capacity. House sold during guardianship evaluation. Total extraction $1.4 million in property, another $890,000 in investments. $2.3 million total." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Settled out of court. Thatcher resigned from his Connecticut firm before bar disciplinary proceedings. The resignation kept it off the National Lawyer Regulatory Data Bank, so his Massachusetts application went through clean. The victim died in the facility 2 years later. His children from a first marriage contested the estate for 4 more years." I turned the page. A photograph was clipped to the settlement agreement. An elderly man on a porch that no longer belonged to him, looking at the camera with an expression I had spent 3 decades learning to identify. The face of someone who had trusted documents more than instincts. The face of someone who had signed papers they didn't understand because the person asking was family or close enough that the distinction stopped mattering. The face of someone who had been moved out of his own life and hadn't quite understood how it happened until too late. I closed the file and looked at Virgil. "Does my daughter know who she married?" I asked. He shook his head. "That," I said, "is the most useful thing you've told me tonight." Virgil waited. He knew the silence meant I was running calculations, assessing variables, building the framework for what came next. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Based on the pattern, 4 months, maybe 6. He's being careful. Won't move until he thinks all the pieces are positioned correctly. Then we have time to build something better." "Better than what?" "Better than stopping him," I said. "I want to let him commit. I want documentation showing intent, pattern, premeditation. I want him to believe he succeeded. And then I want to show him exactly what systematic predation looks like when the target has spent 31 years learning how to identify it." Virgil smiled, not warmly, the smile of someone who had just been given a problem requiring his specific expertise. "How much are you willing to risk?" he asked. "Everything except Oakmont," I said. "And everything except the chance to make sure my daughter understands who she's protecting before she has to choose what that protection costs." The tugboat had cleared the harbor. The harbor settled back into its nighttime stillness, unreadable. In 4 months, maybe 6, Thatcher Garrett would make his move, and I would be ready. 2 months after that night in Virgil's office, I sat in the examination room of the surgeon who would handle my eyes, and asked a question I had spent 6 weeks formulating, not because the words were complicated, but because I needed to understand exactly where the line was before I asked someone to stand on it with me. Dr. Simone Reyes, 52, and chief of glaucoma services at Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary, sat across from me in her private office with her hands folded on a desk that held nothing except a single file folder and a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. She had that particular stillness that physicians develop after decades of delivering difficult news, the ability to wait without filling silence. I had scheduled the appointment as a consultation about cataract surgery, which was true, The cataracts were real, but that wasn't why I needed 2 hours of her time on a Tuesday afternoon in May. The surgery itself is straightforward, she said. Both eyes sequential procedures, 3 weeks apart. Standard recovery timeline is 6 to 8 weeks for full visual acuity restoration. Most patients see significant improvement within the first month. And the documentation, I asked. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of her attention. What specifically are you asking about documentation? I had rehearsed this part. Not the words themselves, I trusted my ability to speak clearly under pressure, but the sequence, the logical foundation that would let her see the request as ethical constraint rather than deception. Hospital protocols require filing updated patient records within 30 days of post-surgical assessment, I said. HIPAA regulations prohibit disclosure of protected health information to parties not authorized by the patient. I need you to follow both those regulations precisely, not early, not to unauthorized third parties, precisely as written. Dr. Reyes turned her chair to face the window. Her office overlooked the Charles River, and the afternoon sun turned the water into something that looked solid. She was quiet for nearly a minute. "You're not asking me to falsify anything," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "No. You're asking me not to update public-facing records until the legal window closes." "Yes. And you're asking me not to volunteer information to people who contact me, claiming authority they don't legally possess under patient privacy law." "Yes." She turned back to face me. Why, I had expected this question. Deserved it, actually. You don't ask a physician to participate in strategic silence without explaining the context that makes it necessary. "My son-in-law is a real estate attorney," I said. "He has been accessing my financial records through a power of attorney I signed 3 years ago. He has been building a case for guardianship based on visual impairment and declining cognitive function. If this surgery restores my vision to normal range within the timeline I expect, and if he learns that information before he makes his legal filing, he will adjust his strategy. I need him to file based on incomplete information. That's so you can defeat the guardianship petition. So I can document that the guardianship petition was fraudulent from inception." Dr. Reyes studied me with the same expression I imagine she used when examining surgical margins under magnification. Celeste had trusted doctors. Without question, it was one of the reasons the cancer took her so quickly. She had waited 3 months to get that first lump checked, because she didn't want to be someone who panicked over nothing. By the time she saw Dr. Reyes, the margins were already unclear. Stage 3, maybe 4. The surgery couldn't get it all. "Celeste was my patient," Dr. Reyes said quietly. I hadn't known she would make that connection, though I should have. Celeste had gone to Mass Eye and Ear for the vision problems that turned out to be neurological symptoms from the cancer spreading. Dr. Reyes had been the one to send her for the MRI that found the brain metastases. "I know," I said. She talked about her daughter during the appointments. Brilliant girl. Behavioral economics. Married to someone Celeste said was very polished. Thatcher Garrett. Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. "And now he's trying to have you declared incompetent. Using medical documentation he assumes will support visual impairment that won't actually exist by the time he files." She stood and walked to the window. "What you're asking is that I don't volunteer information to people who have no legal right to it yet. That's not falsification. That's patient confidentiality. But if this goes to court, I will testify to the actual timeline. Truthfully, under oath, no exceptions. That's all I'm asking. And if testifying truthfully undermines whatever trap you're building, then it was a poorly built trap," I said. "I spent 31 years at the Federal Reserve constructing frameworks that had to survive adversarial scrutiny. I don't build traps that require perjury to function. What is the ethical weight of inaction when you know someone is building a case on information you could correct, but have no legal obligation to volunteer?" That was the real question she was calculating, not whether to help me, but whether staying silent within the bounds of patient privacy law constituted help, or simply adherence to the regulations she had sworn to follow. "When do you want to schedule the first surgery?" she asked. "July," I said. "Second eye in August, full recovery by late September, documented in your private records, but not filed with the hospital system until the 30-day window closes after final assessment, which would be late October." "Yes." She walked me out herself, which she didn't usually do. At the door she stopped and said, "The man in Connecticut. What happened to him?" I told her. "The facility. 2 years until he died. 4 more years of estate litigation afterward. She nodded once, a single deliberate movement that contained an entire decision. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I understood what the nod meant. She had just agreed to stand on the line with me. The medical piece was in place, but the financial trap required something more delicate, instruments that would read as genuine debt to a real estate attorney while remaining under my complete control. June. I had 5 months left before the surgery I hadn't yet scheduled, and I spent the first evening of that countdown sitting in my study with the wall safe standing open and 3 instruments laid out on the desk that would read as genuine evidence to a real estate attorney, but remain under my complete control. The study windows faced west toward Beacon Hill's gas lamps. I had turned off the overhead fixture, leaving only the desk lamp. Virgil was on the phone, his voice coming through the speaker with flat precision. "The UCC filing is live with Kentucky Secretary of State," he said. "Searchable, verifiable. 31.2 million secured lien against Oakmont Estate. It'll take him 4 to 6 hours to unpack the release mechanism. If he's not thorough, he'll miss that you control both sides." I picked up the financing statement, a legitimate UCC-1 form filed with the state office creating a secured creditor position. What it didn't show was that the creditor was a shell entity controlled by Virgil's firm, which meant I could release the lien with a single signature. "And the UV ink?" I asked. "Invisible to naked eye. Standard black pen under normal light. Bank watermarks and routing numbers appear under black light. Any forensic examiner will spot it immediately, but your son-in-law won't think to check unless someone tells him to look." The blank bank receipt sat in the safe's upper corner, signed with ink that would betray itself under ultraviolet examination. It would look legitimate until someone actually tested it. By then, Thatcher's reliance on it would be documented. The third item was simply a sealed envelope with Celeste's handwriting. "Will amended July 2023. The envelope was empty. I had sealed it 3 weeks ago. But Thatcher wouldn't open it in my presence. He would photograph it, document its existence, maybe take it for guardianship proceedings. Evidence of his access. Evidence of his intent. I placed all 3 items in the safe, positioned carefully enough to look unconsidered. Then I closed the door, but left the key in the desk drawer, visible if someone looked. I had mentioned the safe to Ondine 2 years ago, shown her the key location. At the time, it seemed like reasonable transparency. Now, it was an invitation. "He's going to find that safe," I said. "I know," Virgil said. "The question is which instrument he reaches for first. That's the only variable I haven't fully modeled." "Does it matter?" "No, any of the 3 documents him. The order just affects the narrative sequence." Celeste had taught me to build systems, not to manipulate people. The distinction between those 2 things had always been clear to her, in ways it wasn't always clear to me. Systems had rules. People had vulnerabilities. I was building something that sat uncomfortably between the 2. 5 weeks later, mid-July, summer heat, making Boston feel smaller. I sat at a corner table in Café Algier in Cambridge and waited for someone I had spent 3 weeks finding. It had taken Virgil that long to locate Tamara Irvine, 31, and executive assistant to Thatcher Garrett's solo practice. She had worked for him 4 years, handled his files, managed his calendar. According to Virgil's research, she believed she was in a relationship with him that Ondine knew nothing about. The printed email sat on the table. I had slid it across without preamble when she sat down. Corporate phone metadata. Timestamp from the previous Tuesday. Message to someone who wasn't Tamara, using language that made the relationship status unambiguous. She stared at it for 1 full minute without speaking. I counted the seconds. At 47 seconds, she picked up her coffee cup, then set it down without drinking. At 53 seconds, she looked up. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Clarence Hewitt. I believe you work for Thatcher Garrett. This email was sent from his corporate phone last Tuesday." She looked back at the paper. Another 15 seconds. "What do you need?" she asked. No questions about why I had the email. No questions about what I intended. Just the assessment of someone who had moved past shock into calculation. "Everything," I said. "Calendar access, client files, correspondence, phone logs, everything you can document without triggering audit logs that would alert him." "When?" "It's starting now, ending when I tell you it's over." She stood up. Her coffee sat untouched, still steaming. "You'll hear from me," she said. She walked out without looking back. The convenient thing and the right thing are not always the same thing, and I had spent 31 years in a profession where that distinction mattered less than the outcome. But sitting in that Cambridge cafe, watching her disappear into summer foot traffic, I had to ask myself whether what I had just done was strategic or simply cruel. I had identified a structural weakness in Thatcher's operation, someone close enough to access everything, but vulnerable enough to be turned. I had engaged that weakness with evidence she couldn't ignore. She had agreed immediately without negotiation, because I had given her a reason that felt like justice instead of betrayal. But I had also taken someone's worst day and weaponized it. I had turned her pain into my tactical advantage. The fact that Thatcher deserved what was coming didn't change what I had just asked her to do, or what that would cost her in ways I wouldn't be there to measure. The question I couldn't answer was whether using her vulnerability made me different from Thatcher, or just more efficient. He exploited people for money. I was exploiting someone's pain to stop him from exploiting me. The moral calculus should have been clear. It wasn't. I left a 20 on the table. It didn't cover anything, not what I was asking her to do, not what Thatcher had done to her, not the fact that I had just turned someone's worst day into my strategic advantage. But it was something. I had run out of instruments that measured more than that. 4 months separated that Cambridge mornings from the November call. 4 months to schedule the surgery, recover in absolute secrecy, and wait for Thatcher to make the move I had spent 8 months engineering him toward. Back to that Monday afternoon. 4 months of preparation compressed into the 15 minutes before a car would arrive to transport me to a facility I had no intention of entering, and I stood in front of the mirror in Walden Cottage adjusting sunglasses that hid eyes seeing in perfect high definition, while practicing the slower walk of someone who couldn't. 1:45 p.m. 15 minutes until the scheduled pickup. The encrypted phone sat on the kitchen counter next to cold coffee I had poured at dawn and never touched. I picked it up and dialed Virgil. "Everything in place?" I asked. "FBI briefing complete," he said. "White-collar unit. They're interested but not committed. They want to see documentation before they move. Tamara delivered the USB drive yesterday. Client correspondence email chains, written, memoranda, and contemporaneous notes from guardianship planning sessions. Connecticut file is included. They'll compare patterns. And the fund? A $4.2 million ready to execute counter transaction. Wire transfer completes in under 3 hours on your signal. Account is anonymous but traceable if they know where to look, which they won't until you tell them." I walked to the window. November trees stood bare against gray sky. Somewhere 1,700 miles south, Galileo was grazing in Kentucky, grass unaware that his continued existence as a free animal depended on what happened in the next 72 hours. "They think they're moving me at 2 o'clock, I said. "I know. They're wrong about that. They're wrong about everything." Virgil was quiet for 3 seconds. "Clarence, once you trigger this, you can't pull back. If Ondine gets caught in the blast radius..." I gave her every chance to ask questions, every chance to look at the documents she was signing. She chose not to. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." I ended the call and turned back to the mirror. The man looking back at me wore sunglasses indoors in November and held a wooden cane that had never touched pavement except as performance. I practiced the walk again, slightly shorter. Stride weight shifted to favor the left leg, the subtle hesitation of someone navigating space without complete visual confidence. Celeste always said I played things too close to the chest, never let anyone see what I was actually thinking. She wasn't wrong, but today I was going to let them see exactly what I needed them to see. The surgery had happened in July, exactly as planned. Both eyes 3 weeks apart. Dr. Reyes had restored my vision to better than I'd had at 40, and I had spent August and September wearing sunglasses in her private examination room while she documented continued photosensitivity in my file. The 30-day window for updating public records had closed in late October. Thatcher's title search would show surgical dates, but no outcome documentation. Incomplete information, exactly as designed. Tamara had delivered everything I asked for and more. Email correspondence dating back 14 months. Audio recordings of Thatcher coaching her on how to phrase guardianship concerns to medical providers. Calendar entries showing coordination between the Connecticut Victims Facility and St. Jude Gardens administration. She had asked for nothing in return, except confirmation that I would make sure everyone knew what he was. I had promised her that. It was the only promise I could keep without calculating the cost first. Celeste had died 3 years ago, and in those 3 years I had learned something she tried to teach me for 40 years. Before that, the difference between hiding what you think and showing people exactly what you want them to believe. Hiding meant they tried to figure you out. Showing meant they stopped looking because they thought they already knew. Today I was going to show them an elderly man who couldn't quite see properly, who moved carefully, who needed help. They would believe it because I would give them every signal that confirmed what they wanted to be true, and while they believed that I would be watching them with eyes that saw everything in a high definition. I set down the cane and picked up the phone one more time. Text message to Virgil. 4 words. Clock is running. His reply came back in 6 seconds. Confirmed. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and checked the kitchen clock. 1:58. The car should arrive in 2 minutes. I picked up the cane again, adjusted the sunglasses one final time, and walked to the front window to watch the road. The performance was about to begin. 8 months of preparation, 3 months of surgical recovery kept absolutely secret, 5 weeks since the documentation window closed, 72 hours until the trap sprung completely. I had spent 31 years at the Federal Reserve, teaching people how to identify systemic risk before it collapsed their institutions. I had learned to see the patterns that others missed, to calculate the cascade effects of decisions that looked isolated but weren't. Thatcher Garrett thought he was executing a careful plan to extract an elderly man's assets using legal instruments and medical documentation. What he was actually doing was building a documentary record of premeditated elder financial exploitation that would meet every element of Massachusetts general law. Chapter 19A, Section 14. Criminal statute, not civil. 15 to 20 years. Federal time if prosecuted fully. But I wasn't going to prosecute him fully. I was going to give him a choice, the same choice Celeste asked me to give our daughter. That was the promise I had made to my wife while she was dying. That was the promise I intended to keep. The car pulled up at exactly 2:04, 4 minutes late. I had expected punctuality from my son-in-law. He was a real estate attorney, a man who measured closings in 15-minute increments. 4 minutes late. The car was 4 minutes late. Thatcher was a man who calculated everything, which meant 4 minutes represented something already broken in his timeline. I filed that information away and picked up my cane. Time to go home to the house I had already legally stopped owning, in the way that mattered, to see the daughter I was about to save from herself, and to show a predator what it looked like when the prey had been studying him longer than he'd been hunting. I opened the door and walked slowly, very slowly, to the car. 11 minutes after leaving Walden Cottage, the car pulled up to the Beacon Hill townhouse, and I stepped into my own home using a cane. I didn't need my eyes fully sharp behind dark lenses, and saw immediately what they had been doing. In the weeks I had been carefully invisible. Cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, small items already gone, the systematic dismantling of a life they believed they had the legal right to disassemble. Ondine stood by the staircase. She looked smaller than I remembered, which was strange because she had always been tall like Celeste. But anxiety does that to people, it compresses them. She was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in months. Actual concern. The genuine thing, not the performance. Thatcher stood behind her hands in his pockets, expression professionally neutral. He wore the gray suit he saved for closings. He had worn it to Celeste's funeral. I remembered that now. "Dad," Ondine said. Just the word, nothing after it. I surveyed the room, slowly letting my gaze move across the boxes, the empty bookshelf where Celeste's collection used to be, the bare wall where the photograph of Oakmont had hung for 15 years. They had been thorough. "You've been busy," I said. Thatcher stepped forward, his courtroom voice engaged. "Everything has been done in your best interest under the power of attorney you executed 3 years ago. The sale ensures proper care at St. Jude Gardens. The facility has excellent reviews, and, one sorted, Show me the power of attorney," I said. I moved slowly to the leather armchair, the one piece they hadn't boxed yet because it was too heavy to move without help, and sat down, carefully placing the cane beside me. The performance required consistency. Every gesture calculated. Thatcher reached into his briefcase with practiced ease, not hesitation, not searching. He knew exactly where the document was because he had been ready for this question. He had done this before. That was the thing about him. Everything was practiced, and I had been a risk assessor long enough to know that genuine confidence doesn't look practiced. Genuine confidence has rough edges. Practiced confidence is smooth all the way through. "Of course," he said, sliding the document across the coffee table. I picked it up and stood, walking to the window for better light. The performance again, someone who needed optimal conditions to read. Behind the sunglasses, my eyes saw every word in perfect clarity. I had written this document with Celeste and an estate attorney 4 years ago. I knew what was on page 4, I had put it there specifically. I read slowly, turned pages slowly, let 30 seconds pass in silence. Then I set the document down on the table and looked at Thatcher. Page 4, I said. Section 7B. Read it to me. Thatcher picked up the document. His hands were steady. That told me something he hadn't reviewed this section recently, or if he hadn't understood its implications. He flipped to page 4, started reading in his courtroom voice. This power of attorney shall remain in effect during any period of incapacity as determined by 2 licensed physicians and shall... He paused. I watched his eyes move across the page, his voice slowed. And shall be temporarily suspended during any period in which the principal is under active post-surgical monitoring within 48 hours of general anesthesia administration. Silence. Yeah, keep going, I said. He continued, voice flatter now. Such suspension shall be automatic and require no additional notice or documentation. All actions taken under this instrument during the suspension period shall be void ab initio under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 190B, Section 5502. I let the words settle, let him understand what he had just read. My cataract surgery concluded at 6:14 a.m. on Friday, I said. The sale of this property closed at 3:47 p.m. on the same day, 9 hours and 33 minutes after I left the operating table. Ondine looked at Thatcher, then back at me. That's, she started. Within the 48-hour suspension window, I finished. Under Massachusetts uniform, probate code, the entire transaction is void. 9 hours and 33 minutes. I had calculated it down to the minute the night I sat in Virgil's office looking at audit reports and understood exactly what Thatcher was planning. The surgery date had been chosen specifically. July the 20th for the first eye, August 10th for the second. Both on Fridays, both with general anesthesia, both creating clean 48-hour windows that would expire on Sunday nights when no real estate closings happened. But Thatcher had moved in October. He had waited until he thought I was sufficiently impaired, sufficiently isolated, sufficiently vulnerable. And he had closed the house sale on a Friday afternoon, efficient, clean, all the pieces moving in sequence. Except he had never checked when my most recent surgery actually was. He had assumed the summer dates were the last ones. He hadn't known about the follow-up procedure Dr. Reyes had performed on November 1st, a minor correction that required general anesthesia documented in her private files, but not yet filed with the hospital system. That procedure had ended at 6:14 a.m. The house closing had happened at 3:47 p.m., both on Friday. The silence that followed was a particular kind, the silence of someone realizing they have been standing on a trapdoor for the past 6 weeks, and only just heard the mechanism click. Thatcher recovered first, which told me something. His face shifted, not panic, but recalculation, the look of someone running backup plans. Ondine covered her mouth with her hand, which told me something else entirely. She hadn't known about the clause. Thatcher had known it was there, that was why he recovered so quickly, but he had miscalculated the timing. She hadn't known any of it existed. Thatcher set down the document very carefully. "I'll need to make a call," he said. "Excuse me." He walked outside. Through the window I watched him pace on the front steps, phone to his ear. The division of labor was about to shift. Ondine stayed inside, with me, alone. What told me the most was not that Thatcher had stepped outside to regroup. It was that he had left Ondine to handle the next phase, which meant she was about to threaten something. And the only thing left to threaten was the one thing I couldn't let anyone touch. She turned to face me, and her expression had changed. The anxiety was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized from her dissertation defense 6 years ago, the voice of someone who had just shifted into pure intellectual combat mode. "Dad," she said, "we need to talk about Oakmont." My son-in-law stepped outside to make a call at 2:48, and I recognized it immediately as a rehearsed division of labor. The practice choreography of people who had planned this conversation in advance and believed they had accounted for every variable except the one that mattered most, which was that I had spent 8 months accounting for them. Ondine waited until the front door closed. Then she sat down across from me in the chair that used to be Celeste's reading spot, the one by the window where afternoon light came in at the right angle. She folded her hands in her lap. The anxiety was gone completely now. What replaced it was the voice she had used to defend her dissertation 6 years ago, calm, academic, relentlessly precise. "Even if there are questions about the Beacon Hill transaction," she said, "we can still use co-inheritance rights under Massachusetts law to force liquidation of Oakmont estate. The asset value alone justifies the action. $52 million in equity. You can't maintain that property alone. The operating costs are unsustainable for someone in your condition. I looked at my daughter truly for the first time in months. Really looked at her. Not at what she was doing or what she was saying, but at her face, the way she held herself, the quality of her voice when she believed she was being reasonable. She looked exactly like Celeste. Not in coloring, Ondine had my darker hair where Celeste had been, light brown going silver, but in the set of her jaw, the way she maintained direct eye contact, even when delivering difficult information, the ability to present hard truths without cruelty, but without softening. Celeste had sat in a doctor's office and received a stage 4 diagnosis, with the same expression, calm acknowledgement of reality, immediate shift to strategic planning. Your mother stood in that pasture 4 years ago, I said quietly, and asked me to promise something. Dad, this doesn't have to be adversarial. Her tone was almost gentle. We can work out an arrangement that... She asked me to promise I would never let anyone sell Oakmont who didn't love it first. She said the horses know when someone doesn't belong there. Ondine's expression didn't change. Mom was sentimental about the property, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills for 37 retired horses or maintain 200 acres. I looked down at my hands. 60 years old. Celeste used to say my hands looked like I'd spent my life working outdoors instead of in Federal Reserve offices. Practical hands, she called them. Hands that could fix a fence or sign a document with equal competence. I wondered if my daughter knew what she had inherited, not the behavioral economics degree or the academic precision, but the quality Celeste had of making you understand exactly where you stood without ever raising her voice. That was a gift that could be used for clarity or for cruelty. Celeste had always chosen clarity. I wasn't sure which one Ondine was choosing now. The front door opened. Thatcher stepped back inside with the face of a man who had just been assured the situation was still manageable. He didn't know what was coming next. That was the problem. With practiced confidence, it looked so much like the real thing that sometimes you convinced yourself. I've spoken with counsel, he said, settling back into the chair next to Ondine. We have options regarding the suspension clause interpretation. The language could be read as applying only to medical decisions, not financial ones. We're prepared to argue. Before we discuss interpretations, I said, there's something about Oakmont you should know. I opened my laptop, the one they hadn't thought to confiscate because they assumed I could barely see the screen, and pulled up a document I had prepared 3 months ago in Virgil's office. I turned the screen so they could both see it. Oakmont Estate carries a $31.2 million secured lien under UCC Article 9, I said, filed with the Kentucky Secretary of State, fully searchable in public records. Any party claiming co-ownership or liquidation rights would assume proportional liability for this obligation as a condition of claim. Thatcher stared at the number. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the filing details. He was a real estate attorney. He understood UCC lien mechanics. He understood what proportional liability meant. I watched his eyes shift the moment of recalculation. 31 million, Ondine said slowly. That would mean the equity is only 21 million, less than half what we thought. And your share of that equity, I said, would come with your share of the debt service, approximately $600,000 annually, personally guaranteed. Thatcher set down his coffee cup very carefully. I'd want my own attorney to review that filing, verify the terms. Of course, I said. Take all the time you need. $31.2 million. The number was large enough to be credible, structured enough to require genuine verification, and completely reversible the moment I decided to release the instrument, because the secured creditor was a shell entity controlled by Virgil's forensic audit firm, which meant I held both sides of the transaction. The debt was real, in every legal sense that would show up in a title search. It was also entirely under my control, but Thatcher didn't know that. And the verification process I had built into the filing, the deliberate complexity of the release mechanisms, the multiple authentication requirements, the cross-reference documentation across 3 jurisdictions would take his attorneys between 4 and 6 hours to fully analyze. I had structured it that way intentionally. I'll need to step outside again, Thatcher said, standing. This is more complex than anticipated. I understand, I said. He left at 3:11. I knew exactly how long the call would take, because I had engineered the instrument to require exactly that duration to verify. By the time he understood the full structure, it would be evening, and by evening, other pieces would already be moving that he couldn't see yet. Ondine sat very still in Celeste's chair. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, Not anger, not even frustration. Something closer to recognition, the moment when a chess player realizes their opponent has been thinking 5 moves ahead the entire game. "Dad," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" I removed my sunglasses for the first time since entering the house. Let her see my eyes. Let her see that they focused perfectly on her face, tracked her movements with absolute clarity, showed no sign of the visual impairment she believed I had. "I'm protecting what your mother asked me to protect," I said. "The question is what you're protecting and whether you actually understand who's giving you the instructions." She didn't answer my question, just stared at me with those eyes that had always been too much like her mother's, and I wondered if Ondine was beginning to understand that the person who couldn't see clearly wasn't the one wearing sunglasses. In that quiet pocket of waiting, while my son-in-law was making calls that would take him into evening, I sat in my kitchen and thought about another corridor, the hospital lights just as harsh as these 4 years ago, when Celeste had just heard her diagnosis and asked me to promise something I didn't understand until it was too late to ask her what she meant. The Cancer Center corridor, Boston. Late afternoon in 2020. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look like they were already dying. The smell of antiseptic trying to cover something it couldn't quite reach. 2 people sitting in plastic chairs after a doctor had said, "Stage 4 and metastatic, and we'll do everything we can. But you should understand." Celeste hadn't cried. She had taken my hand, her fingers cold despite the overheated hallway, and said my name once. Then she had been quiet for maybe 3 minutes while I tried to figure out what you're supposed to say when your wife of 38 years has just been told she has maybe 18 months. "Clarence," she said finally, "promise me 2 things." "Anything?" "First, Oakmont. We already talked about that. Don't let anyone sell it who doesn't love it first." I nodded. We had talked about it. Many times. The horse is the land, the promise she had extracted from me that the farm would never become a development property or a tax write-off. "Second," she said, and her voice changed slightly, got quieter. "Our daughter, don't give up on her even if she gives you reason to. She's afraid of things she doesn't know how to say. That makes people do things they don't mean, or things they do mean, but wish they didn't." I looked at her. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about what happens after I'm gone. When she has to process grief without the person who taught her how. When someone tells her there's an easier way to handle things than feeling them." "Ondine wouldn't." "She's brilliant and she's terrified," Celeste said. "That's a dangerous combination. Promise me you won't give up on her." I sat there in that hallway for a long time. Hospital staff walked past. Someone's phone was ringing at the nurse's station. Celeste waited. "I'll try," I said finally. She nodded, just once, gently. "That's enough." Then she leaned her head against my shoulder and said something else, quieter, almost to herself. "How much of yourself are you willing to spend to save her?" I didn't answer. I don't think she expected me to. A minute later she had fallen asleep, the exhaustion that comes after bad news, the body's way of processing what the mind can't handle yet. I had thought about that question every day for 3 years. How much of yourself are you willing to spend? And I had prepared it, I had documented, I had built the containment structure carefully. But whether that was the same as saving her, I genuinely did not know. The kitchen clock read 10:32 p.m. when I left Beacon Hill. Thatcher was still on his verification calls. Ondine had gone upstairs an hour ago without saying goodnight. I drove to the parking garage on Battery March Street underground, dimly lit, empty at this hour on a Monday. Tamara's car was already there, idling in a corner spot away from the security cameras I had checked 3 weeks ago to confirm the blind spots. She got out when I pulled in. I walked toward her without the cane, without the sunglasses, my stride normal, my vision perfect. The first time anyone except Dr. Reyes and Virgil had seen me move like myself in 8 months. "Here," she said, handing me a USB drive and a manila envelope. "Everything you asked for, internal emails, Connecticut case files, my written notes and contemporaneous records from when he met with the estate planning specialist about building the guardianship file. I documented everything in writing as a participant in those meetings. I was in the room. I took them. You're doing the right thing." She gave me a smile that had no joy in it. "I'm doing the convenient thing. Don't make it more than that." "It can be both." "No," she said. "It can't. Not for me. For you, maybe. You get to be the person who stopped a predator. I'm just the woman who got played and decided to burn it down on the way out." She got back in her car before I could respond. The engine was still running. She drove away without looking back. I stood in the garage for a minute, holding the USB drive and the envelope. What is the ethical weight of using someone's worst betrayal as your strategic advantage, even if the cause is just, and the alternative is losing everything? That was the question Tamara had just asked me without asking it. The same question I had been asking myself since that Cambridge cafe in July. The USB drive went into my breast pocket next to the folded photograph of Celeste I had carried for 3 years. The one from Oakmont standing in the southern pasture with Galileo, her hair blowing in Kentucky wind. She looked happy in that photograph. She had been happy. Before the diagnosis, before the 18 months compressed into 14, before she had to extract promises from me about protecting things she wouldn't be alive to see. I got in my car but didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there thinking about what Tamara had said. The convenient thing versus the right thing. I had spent 31 years at the Federal Reserve in a profession where that distinction mattered less than the outcome. Risk assessment doesn't care about motivation. It cares about probability, exposure, cascade effects. Whether the person identifying the risk is doing it for justice or revenge or fear, the mathematics don't change. Tonight it was useful that Tamara had chosen convenience over complexity. The recordings would document Thatcher's premeditation. The emails would establish pattern. The Connecticut files would prove this wasn't opportunistic greed, but systematic predation. Whether it was anything more than that, whether using her pain as my tactical advantage made me morally different from Thatcher, or just strategically more competent. I left the question open the way you leave a position open when you don't yet have enough data to close it. But by Tuesday morning, with Thatcher still trying to verify the UCC lien and 6 hours of recorded evidence in my pocket, the data was becoming considerably less ambiguous. Tuesday night, sitting in Walden Cottage with my laptop open, I reviewed the security footage from that morning and watched my son-in-law do exactly what I had spent 5 months engineering him toward walk into my study. Find the key I had left visible in the desk drawer, open the safe, and make the precise choice that would hang him. The timestamp read 9:15 a.m. I had been at the cottage. Ondine had gone to her apartment. Thatcher had told her he needed to pick up additional documents from the house. The camera I had installed behind the antique clock on the bookshelf captured everything in high definition. He entered the study and went straight to the desk. No searching, no hesitation. He had planned this visit specifically. The desk drawer opened on the first try. I had left it unlocked, the key positioned just visibly enough. He held it up to the light, examined it, then walked to the wall, safe. The safe opened smoothly. I watched him photograph the interior with his phone before touching anything. Smart. Creating his own documentation. Then he started removing items one at a time. First, the UCC1 financing statement. He photographed each page. 3 minutes of careful documentation. Then he put it back exactly where it had been. Too verifiable to take, too important to ignore. A real estate attorney would recognize that filing as legitimate, searchable, and impossible to forge without leaving a trail. Second, the sealed envelope marked with Celeste's handwriting. He photographed the front and back. Held it up to the light trying to see through the paper. Almost opened it, then stopped. Put it back. Smart again. Opening it would leave evidence of tampering. Third, the blank bank receipt. He stared at it for almost 30 seconds. Picked it up. Examined the signature. The UV reactive ink looked exactly like standard black ballpoint under normal light. Virgil had been very specific about the formulation. Thatcher turned the paper over, held it at different angles, then folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket. He closed the safe, put the key back in the drawer, left the study. Total time 8 minutes 17 seconds. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark cottage. The camera feed was clear enough that I could see which document he photographed and which he took. He left the lien file too verifiable. He left the sealed envelope too risky to open. He took the bank receipt. Tamara had sent me a text message at 2:47 p.m. Document specialist contacted. Signature work requested. Meeting scheduled tomorrow. A real estate attorney would recognize a UCC filing as verifiable, too risky to forge. But a signature on plain bank stationery, that was something he thought he could work with. He would take it to someone who specialized in document preparation, someone who could reproduce Celeste's handwriting convincingly enough to pass casual inspection, create an amended will that matched the envelope in the safe, use the signature from the receipt as the authorization. I had known he would find that safe, open it, and make exactly the choices I needed him to make. The only variable I hadn't fully modeled was which instrument he would reach for first. Now I knew. The patience part came next. waiting for him to complete the forgery, waiting for him to present it as genuine, waiting for the moment when he believed he had his final card. I stood up and walked to the window. November darkness came early. Through the trees I could see lights from the nearest house half a mile away. Celeste used to say the cottage felt too isolated, too quiet. I had always found the quiet useful. But that afternoon earlier, before I reviewed the footage, before I knew for certain he had taken the bait, there had been a different kind of quiet. The dangerous kind. I had driven to Beacon Hill around 4:30 to pick up files I needed. Thatcher's car wasn't in the driveway, only Ondine's. I almost left without going in, but I needed the estate documents from the study cabinet. She was in the kitchen when I entered, brewing coffee. She looked up when she heard the door. Just getting some files, I said. Okay. She poured 2 cups, slid one across the counter toward me. I hadn't asked for coffee, hadn't planned to stay, but I picked it up. Did Mom know, she asked, about what you'd set up? Yes. She agreed with all of it. She suggested most of it. Ondine stared into her coffee cup. Steam rose between us. The kitchen smelled like the coffee Celeste used to make every morning, same brand, same strength. Ondine had always insisted on buying the same kind. I miss her, she said quietly. I know. Long silence. The kind where you can hear the refrigerator hum and the clock tick and all the small sounds that houses make when they're trying to fill the space that words can't. Sometimes I think she started. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the screen, looked at me. The moment shattered like glass hitting tile. I have to take this, she said. She stepped outside. Through the window I watched her pace on the front steps, phone to her ear. The same posture Thatcher had used the day before. The same division of labor, taking calls where I couldn't hear them. I stood in the kitchen for a while, after she left the coffee she had made still on the counter untouched. She had been about to say something. I had learned in 31 years that incomplete data is more dangerous than no data because it lets you fill in what you want to find. You start constructing narratives based on fragments. You convince yourself the missing piece says what you need it to say. Sometimes I think you're right. Sometimes I think I made a mistake. Sometimes I think I should have asked more questions before signing documents I didn't fully read. I didn't know. I wouldn't know. The sentence would stay unfinished. I picked up her coffee cup and poured it down the drain. Some things are better left unfinished until there's enough information to complete them. But the coffee growing cold on the counter wasn't one of those things. It was just loss. And loss doesn't get better with more data. Wednesday morning would bring sufficient information of an entirely different kind. The kind that arrives in the form of a forged will and forces every remaining ambiguity into sharp, unmistakable focus. Wednesday morning, day 3 of the 72-hour countdown, my son-in-law arrived at 11 o'clock with a briefcase in his hand and the look of a man who had just found the card he believed was his ace. And I watched him walk through my front door, knowing that in 8 minutes I was going to show him exactly what happens when you forge a dead woman's signature on paper designed to betray you. He came earlier than usual. No phone call, no warning. Just the sound of his key in the lock and his footsteps crossing the foyer with a confidence I hadn't heard before. Ondine followed 2 steps behind her expression, carefully neutral, in the way people look when they've rehearsed the performance. I was sitting in the living room with the morning paper spread across my lap, still wearing the sunglasses, still holding the performance, though we were very close to the end of it now. I set the paper aside slowly and looked up as they entered. Good morning, I said. Thatcher didn't waste time on pleasantries. He set his briefcase on the coffee table, opened it with the practiced movements of someone who had done this before, and pulled out a document. I'd like to present a document recently discovered in legacy files, he said. His closing day cadence, the voice that had finalized other people's losses. The amended last will and testament of Celeste Hewitt, executed 14 months before her death. He slid it across the table toward me. I didn't pick it up immediately, just looked at it. The paper was good quality, professional printing, what appeared to be Celeste's signature at the bottom, a Massachusetts notary stamp. You'll see, Thatcher continued, that it clearly states Oakmont Estate and all associated assets transfer to Ondine with full management authority upon your incapacity, or at age 65, whichever comes first. Given your current condition and the medical documentation we've compiled, the transfer would be effective immediately. I picked up the document, held it. The paper felt wrong too, new, too crisp. But that wouldn't be visible to someone who didn't know what to look for. I studied the signature, studied the notary stamp. Let them watch me read. Ondine sat beside Thatcher, her hands folded in her lap. She was refusing to look at me. That told me more than anything Thatcher had said. She knew this was wrong. Not legally wrong in the technical sense, he would argue, but wrong in the way that matters when you're weaponizing your dead mother's name against your father. I set the document down on the table. "May I borrow your pen?" I asked. Thatcher handed me his pen, a Mont Blanc heavy and certain in the hand, the kind of pen a man carries when he wants you to notice it. Ondine finally looked up from the table, where she had been refusing to meet my eyes. I took the pen, uncapped it, held it over the document as if I was about to sign something. Then I set it down without using it. "I'd like to show you something first," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the UV flashlight I had been carrying for 11 days. Small black, the size of a pen. The kind forensic examiners use to check document authenticity. I clicked it on. "What is that?" Ondine asked. I didn't answer, just shined the ultraviolet beam directly onto Celeste's signature at the bottom of the will. Under normal light, the signature looked perfect. Under UV light, it vanished. What appeared instead was a bank watermark, account routing numbers, the ghost image of letterhead from First Republic Bank that had been visible under the ink when Thatcher's document specialist had traced the signature from the blank receipt I had left in the safe. The UV reactive ink I had used, the ink Virgil had sourced specifically for this purpose, was designed to be invisible to the naked eye, but would fluoresce under ultraviolet examination, revealing whatever was underneath. In this case, proof that the signature had been forged onto bank stationery. Ondine stared at the paper, then at her husband. "What is that?" she said again, louder this time. Thatcher stood up. For the first time since I'd known him, he lost his composure, just for a second. His jaw tightened. His hands moved to his pockets, then out again. He was running calculations. "Well, he started. Under Massachusetts law, Chapter 267. I said calmly, "Forgery of a testamentary document carries up to 10 years in state prison. That's not a negotiating position. That's a statute." The room went dead quiet. I kept the UV light steady on the signature, kept it there so they could both see clearly what they were looking at. Not just a failed forgery, documentary evidence of premeditated criminal fraud. "I don't," Ondine said. She was looking at Thatcher now. "You said this was real. You said you found it in her files." He didn't answer her. He was staring at the document with the expression I had seen before in my career, not often, but enough times to recognize it. The expression of someone whose entire model of a situation had just been invalidated. Not just one assumption, the entire framework. Every calculation suddenly wrong. In risk management, that is the most dangerous moment. People in that state do unpredictable things. My daughter sat down not gracefully, just dropped into the chair like her legs had stopped working. My son-in-law was still standing, his hands opening and closing at his sides. I clicked off the UV light and set it on the table next to the forged will. "Now," I said, "would you like to tell me what else you've been planning? Or should I walk you through it myself?" Thatcher's face shifted. The panic smoothed out, replaced by something harder. He reached for his phone. "Before we continue this conversation," he said, "there's something you should understand about the Beacon Hill sale, the deposit, the buyer. You think you know who purchased this property? You don't." He was pivoting, abandoning the forgery, moving to what he thought was his next card. The one piece of information he believed I didn't have. I almost smiled. Almost. But I kept my expression neutral and waited for him to finish digging. He was right about one thing. I didn't know who had purchased the property. Because technically speaking, I had purchased it myself. But I let him talk. Thatcher straightened his tie, shifted his weight. The defensive posture from 2 minutes ago, when I had exposed the forged will, had transformed into something more aggressive. He was pivoting, abandoning the lost position, moving to what he believed was solid ground. "The will may have issues," he said. "Fine, we can debate provenance. But here's what you need to understand about the Beacon Hill transaction. The deposit $2 million hit Ondine's account 3 weeks ago, October 18th. She used power of attorney authority to execute the purchase agreement on October 14th. The money transferred 4 days later. I sat very still, let him continue. On October 21st, Thatcher said, Ondine cleared an urgent debt obligation, $1.9 million. Wire transfer, documented, the money is spent. Ondine was watching me, waiting for a reaction. I gave her none. Thatcher pressed forward. "So even if you contest the will, Even if you challenge the medical basis for the guardianship petition, the house sale stands. The buyer has deposit proof. The purchase agreement is binding. Closing is scheduled for November 22nd. If Ondine defaults, they sue for specific performance or damages exceeding $3 million. He paused. Let that sink in. The legal checkmate he thought he was delivering. You can fight about inheritance percentages later, he continued. You can argue about who gets what from the estate, but the house sale cannot be undone. The buyer is an LLC entity with a litigation budget. Your daughter's debt payoff is a documented wire transfer to a creditor entity. The money is gone. I looked at Ondine. She was sitting very straight in her chair, hands folded, the posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Who is the purchasing entity? I asked. Thatcher hesitated, just for a second. The buyer requested anonymity per the NDA clause in the purchase agreement. Your daughter signed it. I'd like to know anyway. The NDA is legally binding. Who is the purchasing entity? I asked again. Same tone, same volume. Celeste had predicted this exact sequence. I could hear her voice from that hospital corridor 4 years ago, explaining how it would unfold. The daughter would overextend. The lawyer would create a fait accompli. Money already moved, contracts already signed. Then they would demand settlement to avoid mutual destruction. But Celeste had also said something else. The trap only works if they believe the ground is solid. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. What are you doing? Thatcher asked. I scrolled to my contacts, found the name I needed, tapped it, set the phone to speaker mode, and placed it on the coffee table between us. The ringing tone filled the room. Once, twice. What is this? Thatcher said. I didn't answer, just waited. Third ring. Click. A familiar voice came through the speaker. Virgil Blanchard here. Virgil, I said. I'm with my daughter and her attorney. We're discussing the Beacon Hill property purchase. Could you clarify the purchasing entity for the record? Wamdesistar. Went. Silence on the other end, not empty silence. The silence of a man who had been waiting for this exact call. Before I tell you who actually owns that $2 million, are you still with me? Comment A. If you think this ends in forgiveness, or B, if you think this ends in permanent damage, and tell me why in one sentence. A quick note. What comes next includes some recreated details for storytelling impact. The lesson is what matters. The entity Virgil said carefully, is Blanchard Capital LLC, registered Delaware Corporation. Thatcher's face went very still. And who funded the $2 million deposit? I asked. Private loan from my advisory portfolio, Virgil said, per your instructions last July. Thank you, I said. I ended the call and set the phone back on the table. Ondine's face had drained of color. All of it. She looked like someone had just told her the floor she was standing on was actually a painting. Thatcher was still standing, frozen. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. I looked at my daughter, spoke calmly, precisely. The $2 million that hit your account in October was mine, I said. I asked Virgil to structure an anonymous purchase through his LLC. You used power of attorney authority to sell me my own house. Then you transferred $1.9 million to clear what you believed was your debt. I paused. Let her process. The creditor entity you paid, I continued, is also controlled by Virgil's portfolio, which means your debt, all $1.9 million of it, is now owed to me. The house was never sold. Your debt was never cleared. You borrowed my money to pay my associate while believing you were stealing my property. Ondine's hands started to tremble, small movements, but I could see them. Thatcher opened his briefcase, then closed it, opened it again, closed it, said nothing. I set my phone down on the coffee table. Through the bay window, I could see November wind stripping the last leaves from the Beacon Hill maples. The trees looked skeletal, bare, the way things look when there's nothing left to hide behind. 30 seconds of silence, maybe 40. I counted them. Ondine was looking at me now. Not with anger, not even with the defensive calculation she'd had 10 minutes always, with something else. Dawning comprehension. The expression of someone who had just understood the full architecture of the trap they'd been walking through. Every move she had made, the power of attorney, the house sale, the debt payment, even sitting here today, with Thatcher presenting a forged will, every single move had tightened the box. I had anticipated each one, prepared for each one, monetized each one. She had thought she was stealing my house. She had actually been borrowing my money to pay my associate while I documented every element of the theft. Thatcher started to speak. I raised one finger. He stopped. My daughter's voice came out smaller than I'd heard it in years. Dad, she said. The word cracked slightly in the middle. How long have you known? I looked at her, removed my sunglasses so she could see my eyes clearly. Perfect vision, no impairment. Never had been, not for 7 weeks. I met her gaze with the same steady assessment I had used in boardrooms for 31 years. The same expression I had worn when evaluating systemic risk at the Federal Reserve. The same calm I had learned from calculating probability until emotion became irrelevant. I am a risk assessor, I said. I have always known. Thatcher Garrett stood up. He closed his briefcase without latching. It walked to the front door without speaking and left. The door clicked shut at 12:20 p.m. Ondine sat in the chair where she'd been when I revealed Virgil as the buyer. Her face was pale. Not shock anymore. Something else. I remained in my chair. The sunglasses sat on the coffee table next to the UV flashlight and the forged will. I didn't need them anymore. 45 minutes passed. Neither of us spoke. At 1:05 p.m. the front door opened. Thatcher came back carrying a thicker file. He set it on the coffee table. This is a guardianship petition, he said. Hearing is scheduled for November 18th. I picked up the folder. 2 supporting documents attached. 2 independent physicians confirm cognitive impairment and visual deficits affecting judgment, Thatcher said. I read the first doctor's opinion, dated October 9th. The second was dated November 4th. You should have done this first, I said. Before the House, before the POA. You did it last. His jaw tightened. The petition is valid. If I lack capacity on October 14th, then the POA authorization for the House sale is void. You boxed yourself. Silence. Ondine looked at her husband, then at me. The first doctor's opinion is dated October 9th, I said. 5 days before Ondine signed the purchase agreement. If I was incapacitated on October 9th, I was incapacitated on October 14th. Every action taken under POA authority during that period is voidable. I set the petition down next to the forged will. You built this backward. Guardianship should have been first. Establish incapacity, then justify the POA actions. Instead, you used the POA first and only filed for guardianship when everything else failed. That's panic. Ondine spoke for the first time in almost an hour. Dad, please, can we just... I file information in the evidence column, not the anger column, I said. Anger is the least useful of all. How many traps can one person walk into before they realize the architect is watching every step? I had been watching Thatcher for 8 months, every move documented. The Connecticut file had shown me his playbook. He ran the same pattern every time. And now he had filed guardianship as a last resort, creating a legal record that contradicted his own prior actions. Thatcher picked up his briefcase. The petition stands. We'll see you at the hearing. He left. Ondine stood and followed him. The door closed. She had left with him. I sat alone reading the guardianship petition. The doctor's opinions cited incidents of confusion, memory lapses, visual errors, all fabricated or exaggerated but documented carefully. The October 9th date was insurance, a fallback position, but he had waited too long, creating the contradiction that would invalidate both strategies. November afternoon, light slanted through the bay window, casting long shadows across legal documents on the coffee table. The forged will, the guardianship petition, the UV flashlight. 8 months of planning meeting, 8 months of counter-planning. My phone rang at 4:02 p.m. Virgil. Your daughter visited Walden Cottage this afternoon, he said. She made Tamara an offer. I set down the petition. What kind of offer? It's $5,000 cash. Intelligence on your activities and associates. Tamara called me within 10 minutes. Did Tamara accept? She took the money. Your daughter thinks she recruited an inside source. She doesn't know Tamara has been reporting to me since July. Every dollar Ondine pays her funds surveillance of herself. I looked at the window where shadows had lengthened. Thank you, I said. What do you want me to tell Tamara? Tell her to take the money, provide whatever information Ondine asks for, but filter it through me first. You're going to feed your daughter controlled information through her own paid source. Yes. Virgil was quiet. Clarence, at what point does this stop being protection and start being something else? I didn't answer. I thanked him and ended the call. Ondine believed she had just gained an advantage. She thought she had found someone who could tell her what I was planning. What she had actually done was convert Tamara from a single-direction intelligence asset into a controlled two-way channel. Every question Ondine asked would tell me what she was thinking. Every answer Tamara gave would be information I had approved. My daughter had just paid $5,000 to fund her own surveillance. I stood and walked to the window. Beacon Hill in late afternoon, brick sidewalks, gas lamps, careful preservation. Celeste used to say I was good at seeing patterns, at understanding how systems worked and where they would fail. She said it was a gift. She also said it was dangerous when you started to see people as systems. I wondered which one Ondine was becoming. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for November 18th, 12 days away. Thatcher would present his medical evidence. I would present mine, Dr. Reyes's testimony about vision restored 7 weeks ago. The deliberate withholding within legal windows, the strategic timing. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that Thatcher had just shown me his last card. The guardianship petition was his final move, and it undermined everything he had done before it. I picked up my phone and texted Virgil tell Tamara to answer Ondine's questions. Start with small truths. Build trust. Wait for my signal before feeding anything strategic. His reply came in seconds. Understood. I looked at the documents on the coffee table, the forged will with its UV revealed watermark, the guardianship petition with its contradictory dates, the evidence of a man so focused on executing his plan that he hadn't noticed someone else had been building a better one. Ondine thought she was recruiting intelligence. What she was actually doing was showing me exactly what she didn't understand, exactly what she was afraid of, exactly where she thought my weaknesses were. And in doing so, she had just given me the last piece of information I needed to know whether Celeste's question had an answer. How much of yourself are you willing to spend to save her? I was about to find out. Wednesday night. The Boston skyline glowed through the bay window, city lights reflecting off November clouds, and I heard Celeste's voice asking the question I never answered. How much of yourself are you willing to spend to save her? She had asked me that 3 years ago, the last night. Boston hospital room, with machines beeping and nurses checking vitals every 30 minutes, and the particular smell hospitals have when someone is dying in them. Celeste couldn't sleep. The pain medication made her restless instead of drowsy. She had asked me to turn off the overhead light, leave just the small lamp by the window. It cast shadows across her face that made her look older than 57. She's going to do something that breaks your heart, Celeste said, not looking at me, looking at the ceiling. Not because she's cruel, because she's afraid. I had been sitting in the chair next to her bed for 6 hours. What are you talking about? Our daughter, after I'm gone. She's going to do something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about her. Ondine wouldn't. She's brilliant and she's terrified, Celeste interrupted. That combination makes people dangerous, mostly to themselves. She turned her head to look at me. The lamplight caught her eyes, still sharp, still seeing things I couldn't. What should I do? I asked. She smiled, small, sad. You prepare, you document, you build the containment structure, then you decide in the moment how much of yourself you're willing to spend to save her. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You just don't like it. I had thought about that conversation every day for 3 years. How much of yourself are you willing to spend? And I had prepared, documented, built the containment carefully. But whether that was the same as saving her, I genuinely did not know. My phone rang Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. Dr. Reyes. Clarence, she said, no preamble. I need to tell you something about those guardianship medical opinions. I set down my coffee. I'm listening. The peer review requests came 4 months ago, July, before your surgery. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Physicians request colleague opinions on complex cases regularly. But the timing, ¿Dónde está examinadores? 4 months ago, I said. Yes, which means the guardianship plot wasn't opportunistic. It was planned well in advance. They were building the medical foundation before you even had the surgery. I looked out the window, November rain starting. What does that change legally? Chapter 19A, Section 14, Dr. Reyes said. Premeditated financial exploitation of an older adult. That's criminal, Clarence, not civil. That's 15 to 20 years if prosecuted federally. I thanked her and ended the call. 4 months. July. That was when I had first met Tamara at the Cambridge Cafe, when I had started building the surveillance architecture, when Virgil had begun structuring the UCC lien and the ghost buyer mechanism. But Thatcher had been moving 4 months before that. He had been planning this since March, maybe earlier. Thursday afternoon, Virgil drove to Walden Cottage. I heard his car on the gravel drive at 4:15. He came in without knocking. Tamara found the phone records, he said. He set a printed document on the kitchen table. First call to a guardianship attorney came from Thatcher's cell phone. I looked at the date, My chest tightened. Oh, when I asked, though, I could see the date clearly. 11 days after Celeste's funeral, November 21st, 2021. Ondine didn't know he'd started that early. The phone records show he made the call alone. She wasn't on the line. I stared at the document. November 21st. That was the afternoon I had driven to the cemetery and sat at Celeste's grave for 3 hours, unable to leave, unable to process that she was actually gone. I had been asking her what to do about Ondine, about the strange distance I'd felt from my daughter in the hospital those final weeks. Thatcher had been at his desk making phone calls. November wind rattled the cottage windows. Through the kitchen I could see autumn leaves scattering across the porch, where Celeste used to read on Saturday mornings. Coffee cup balanced on the railing book, propped against her knees. "Does this change anything?" Virgil asked. "It changes the timeline," I said. "It confirms premeditation. It shows he initiated contact, not her." "Does it change what you're going to do?" I looked at my oldest friend, 63 years old. We had known each other since the Federal Reserve, since before Celeste, since before Ondine was born. He had been at the hospital the night she died. Had driven me home because I couldn't remember where I'd parked my car. "I don't know yet," I said. Virgil nodded. He understood what I meant. The question wasn't about legal strategy anymore. The legal strategy was complete, documented, bulletproof. The question was about something else. How much of yourself are you willing to spend to save her? He left at 4:47. I stayed in the kitchen looking at the phone record printout. November 21st, 2021. 11 days after we buried Celeste under the North Oak at Oakmont, the way she had asked us to, with Galileo, watching from the southern pasture. 11 days, that was how long Thatcher had waited before making his first move. While I was still trying to figure out how to function without her. While Ondine was still wearing black to work. While the house still smelled like the flowers people had sent to the funeral. 11 days. I picked up the phone record and filed it in the folder with everything else. The audit reports from March, the Connecticut case file, the USB drive from Tamara, the forged will, the guardianship petition, the UCC lien documents, the evidence of 8 months of systematic predation. I put the phone record into the folder with everything else. 31 years of training made the filing automatic. What the training couldn't do was tell me what the weight of that date actually meant. But I had been at Celeste's grave that afternoon, for 3 hours, sitting on wet grass in November, cold, asking my dead wife what I should do. And while I was asking, Thatcher Garrett had been making phone calls. Evidence has weight, and weight changes decisions. Friday morning, November 8th. I arranged 3 years of evidence across Walden Cottage's kitchen table in chronological sequence. Celeste's death certificate, the will she amended 2 months before she died, the POA I signed in July, Clause 7B, printed on ultraviolet reactive paper, bank statements showing the October transfers, the Oakmont sale contracts with Thatcher's signature, dated October 18, 3 days into the suspension window, the UCC-1 filing that appeared 5 hours before surgery, Tamara's recordings on my phone, time-stamped and backed up to 3 separate drives. I didn't invite Virgil, but at 8 o'clock his truck appeared in the driveway. He knocked twice and walked in, carrying an accordion file that looks older than both of us. He set it beside my arranged documents without asking permission. "Final review," he said. We worked in silence for 20 minutes. He cross-referenced dates. I checked dollar amounts against photocopies. The kitchen smells like old paper and coffee I made at dawn. "Connecticut case," Virgil said, pulling a folder from his file. "Judge Marianne Dunlap, 2018. POA exploitation during medical incapacity. Defendant was the son. Sold mother's house 4 days after her stroke, used a similar suspension window loophole. What happened? 8 years federal prison. Wire fraud, elder exploitation, fiduciary abuse." Virgil slid the case summary across the table. "Judge Dunlap's still on the bench. She wrote an opinion piece last year about tightening POA oversight laws. I read the summary. The parallels are exact. Same timeline structure, same calculated waiting period, same family trust violation. I can have this in federal court by Monday," Virgil said. "Dr. Reyes's affidavit about the premeditated medical peer reviews gives us criminal intent. Tamara's recordings give us conspiracy. The UV signature gives us forgery. The suspension window timing gives us deliberate exploitation of incapacity." He's right. Every element is documented, every timeline verified, every statute cited. "But you're not going to file Monday," Virgil said. It's not a question. I looked at the evidence array. Thatcher's phone records showing the call to the guardianship attorney 11 days after Celeste's funeral. The same afternoon, I sat at her grave for 3 hours, and he was already calculating how to erase her daughter's inheritance. I'm giving Ondine a choice first, I said. Virgil nodded once. He expected this. Celeste asked me, I continue. The night before she died, she said, if she does something terrible someday, will you give her a chance to choose differently? Ipo, min man buon bestach. And you said yes. I said yes. Virgil closed the Connecticut file. Mercy before justice. Something like that. And if she chooses him, I didn't answer immediately. Celeste's question had been following me for 3 years. Tonight I would finally have the answer. Then Monday morning, I said, we file everything. Virgil stood collecting his accordion file, but leaving the Connecticut case summary on my table. Federal prosecutors move fast on cases this documented. If it goes that direction, Thatcher's looking at real time. Not probation, not a fine, prison. I know. And Ondine becomes a witness. Possibly an accessory if the timeline shows she knew. I know that too. He walked to the door, then turns back. What time tonight? 7:30, Beacon Hill study. You want me there? No, this part is just family. Virgil nods. Call me after, regardless of how it goes. He leaves. The cottage returns to silence. I spent the afternoon arranging the evidence into 3 separate presentations. One for Ondine, focused on choices and consequences. One for Thatcher, focused on statutes and penalties. One for federal court, focused on deliberate criminal conspiracy. At 6:15, I drove to Boston. The Beacon Hill townhouse looked the same as it did Monday morning, 4 days ago. But 4 days ago, I didn't know about the UV signature, didn't know about the premeditated peer reviews, didn't know Thatcher called the guardianship attorney while I was still sitting at Celeste's grave. I unlocked the front door. The house still smelled faintly like Celeste's jasmine perfume, even after 3 years. Some absences don't fade. I set up the study. Evidence folders arranged on the desk. Connecticut case summary, positioned where Ondine will see it first. Tamara's recording queued on my phone. The POA document with UV markings ready under the desk lamp, I modified with a black light bulb yesterday. At 6:45, the doorbell rang. At 6:45, the D-Doctor Simone Reyes stood on the front step. Bell rang, holding a notarized document. I brought the affidavit, she said, about the peer review requests and their timing. I didn't ask her to come. I thought you might need a witness, she continues. Medical professional, third-party observer. Someone who can testify that whatever happens tonight happened without coercion. I stepped aside. She entered. We don't speak much. She sat in the corner chair, the one Celeste used to read in, and reviews her affidavit silently. Outside, late November, darkness settles over Beacon Hill. The streetlights flicker on, casting long shadows through the study windows. At 7:28, I heard a car door close outside. Dr. Reyes looked up from her affidavit. Our eyes meet. She nods once. Footsteps on the front walk. 2 sets. Ondine and Thatcher arriving together as I knew they would. The doorbell rings. I stood. Checked the evidence arrangement one final time. The POA document with its invisible forgery. The bank statements. The timeline. The Connecticut precedent. 3 years of absence condensed into paper and ink. The house was no longer quiet with nothing happening. It is quiet before everything happens. 7:03. The key turns in the front door lock. I hear 2 sets of footsteps in the entrance hall. Ondine's heels on hardwood, the sound I've known since she was 16, practicing for her first debate tournament in shoes Celeste bought her. Thatcher's heavier tread behind her. Dr. Reyes sits motionless in the corner chair. I remain at the desk, hands folded over the evidence folders. They appear in the study doorway. Ondine enters first, carrying her leather portfolio. Thatcher follows with his laptop case already talking. We have the medical reports ready for review, he says. Dr. Patterson's evaluation supports the guardianship petition timeline. He stops. Ondine stops. They're staring at my face. I'm not wearing sunglasses. Haven't worn them since Wednesday night. The study lights are bright, same wattage Celeste insisted on for reading, and there's no impairment visible in my eyes. No cloudiness, no hesitation, no sign of the vision loss documented in 30 pages of medical reports Thatcher submitted to probate court on Monday. Dad, Ondine says. Her voice sounds younger than 34. Your eyes... I use the voice I developed in 31 years of Federal Reserve operations. The one that ended arguments in rooms with bigger egos than this. Sit down, I say. Both of you. Ondine sits immediately in the chair across from my desk. Muscle memory from childhood. Thatcher remains standing, processing. This is Dr. Simone Reyes. I continue gesturing toward the corner. My ophthalmologist. She'll be serving as medical witness for what happens next. Thatcher's lawyer instincts engage. We're here for the scheduled guardianship discussion. If you want to bring additional parties, it's going to be trainal common o despasende. I said sit down. He sits. I open the top evidence folder, place my phone on the desk screen, visible red recording indicator, active. 2 FBI agents are in the next room, I say. I'm wearing a consent wire. I unbutton my collar. The transmitter wire runs down my chest, visible against my white shirt. Ondine goes pale. Thatcher's professional mask cracks. This is entrapment, Thatcher starts. Any statements made under Dunny? I informed you both that you were being recorded. The moment you walked through that door, I said it clearly in the entrance hall. You chose to stay and continue speaking. Under Massachusetts law, a recording is only unlawful when secret. You were notified. Everything said in this room is admissible in federal court. I slide the Connecticut case summary across the desk. The one Virgil left this morning. Judge Mary Ann Dunlap, 2018. POA exploitation during medical incapacity. The defendant was a son who sold his mother's house 4 days after her stroke. Used a suspension window loophole. 8 years federal prison. Thatcher doesn't touch the document. Ondine stares at it like it might explode. The parallels to your case are exact, I continue. Judge Dunlap is still on the bench, still accepting elder exploitation cases. The federal prosecutor from that trial is now running the Boston field office. I open the second folder, pull out the POA document. Clause 7B, the suspension provision you exploited, printed on ultraviolet reactive paper. I switch on the modified desk lamp. The UV bulb illuminates my signature, genuine, dated July 12, 2024. Below it, Thatcher's witness signature glows a different shade. Your signature was added later, different ink, different chemical composition. That's forgery under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 267. 3 years since Celeste's death. 3 months since I started building this case. 3 days since the countdown began. Everything compressed into this one room, this one conversation, this one choice. I open the third folder. Tamara Irvine, your assistant. She documented 18 planning sessions, calendar records, written memoranda, email chains, and her own contemporaneous notes taken as an authorized party to those meetings. All time-stamped. All backed up to federal servers as of Wednesday morning. I pull out the timeline document, project it onto the study wall using the small projector I set up this afternoon. November 21st, 2021. I read, you called the guardianship attorney for the first time, 11 days after Celeste's funeral. The same afternoon I sat at her grave for 3 hours. Ondine makes a sound, not quite a word. July 2024. I continue. Dr. Patterson receives peer review requests about my medical capacity, 4 months before my surgery. Premeditation documented under Massachusetts Chapter 19A, Section 14 Criminal Elder Abuse Statute. Thatcher stands. I need to consult with my client. Wano Descarson. Sit down. He sits. October 14th, 2024. First POA transaction. October 18th. Oakmont sale contract, signed 3 days into the suspension window. October 21st, the UCC1 filing for $31.2 million appears 5 hours before my surgery. The timeline fills the wall. Every date, every transaction, every phone call, 3 years of calculation exposed in 12 projected slides. Thatcher's composure shatters first. I told you the Connecticut precedent made this too aggressive, he says to Ondine. You insisted the timeline was clean. You called the guardianship attorney first. Ondine shoots back. Her voice breaks. Not me. You said it was standard estate planning. You knew about the suspension clause before I did. All. You drafted the UCC1 filing. I let them talk. The recorder captures every word. Thatcher blaming Ondine for pushing the timeline. Ondine blaming Thatcher for initiating contact. 12 minutes of self-incrimination, building like compound interest. The recorder's red light blinks steady. Ondine's breathing becomes audible in the silence between accusations. Thatcher's hand trembles, holding the phone he can't use to call anyone who might help him. At 14 minutes, I raise one hand. They stop talking. All federal prosecutors build elder exploitation cases on documented pattern and admissible statements. I say quietly, you just provided both. Ondine slides from her chair onto the floor, her back against the bookshelf, the same shelf where Celeste kept her collection of first editions. She stares at nothing. Thatcher stands frozen mid-sentence, mouth still half open on whatever justification he was building. I look toward the study door, nod once. The door opens. 2 FBI agents step through the study door. They don't introduce themselves. They don't need to. The taller one looks at Thatcher. Mr. Garrett, you'll need to come with us. Thatcher stands slowly like a man underwater. He doesn't look at Ondine, doesn't look at me, just follows the agents out. The door clicks shut. I sit alone with my daughter for the first time in 3 years. Ondine remains on the floor back against the bookshelf, the same shelf where Celeste kept her behavioral economics collection, the same corner where Ondine used to sit doing homework while her mother graded papers at this desk. Dr. Reyes stands quietly. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. She leaves. The study door closes again. Silence. Ondine speaks first. Her voice sounds nothing like the professional tone she used an hour ago. How much of it was real? The vision impairment was real, I say. For 6 weeks after surgery, Dr. Reyes can verify the timeline. By mid-September, I had 80% function back. By October, first 95%. And you didn't tell me. No, she processes this. I watch her mind work the same analytical patterns Celeste had the same need to arrange facts into coherent structure. The debt, she says. Oakmont, the $31.2 million. I open the bottom desk drawer, pull out the UCC1 filing documents, the ones showing the lien holder's corporate structure. Virgil holds the bank, I say. I hold Virgil. Both sides are mine. Her eyes widen. Oakmont has no debt, $52 million in unencumbered equity. The lien was a technical instrument, filed to prevent exactly what Thatcher attempted a forced sale during incapacity. I can release it with one signature. Ondine starts laughing. It's not a happy sound, it's exhausted recognition. You are exactly like her, she says. I know she means Celeste. Your mother, I say carefully, would have handled this differently. No, Ondine shakes her head. She would have done exactly this, built the trap, waited 3 years, given me the choice at the end. She's right, I don't confirm it aloud. I pull 2 documents from the center desk drawer, place them side by side on the surface between us. The first document, I say, is a complete criminal referral, wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy to commit guardianship, fraud, forgery. The evidence package includes your emails to Thatcher about timing, the guardianship petition, your knowledge of the Connecticut precedent, your approval of the UCC1 strategy. Ondine doesn't move. If federal sentencing guidelines for coordinated elder exploitation, I continue, are 15 to 20 years, minimum. I touch the second document. Yeah, this is a civil settlement. You waive all inheritance rights to my estate. You accept a permanent federal criminal record for conspiracy, no jail time, but it follows you forever. You pay $2 million to cover the collateral damage from the guardianship petition and legal fees, and you leave Boston within 30 days, permanently. She stares at both documents. The answer to Celeste's question turned out to be everything but her freedom. What kind of life? Ondine asks. The kind where you leave Boston in 30 days and never come back, I say. But you're not in a cell. You can work. You can rebuild. You can become someone different than who you were when you decided your inheritance was worth more than your integrity. Her hands shake as she reaches for the second document. Why, she whispers, because your mother asked me to give you a choice if you ever did something terrible, and I promised her I would. Ondine looks at Celeste's photo on the corner of the desk. The one from their last sabbatical together in 2019 before the diagnosis. She knew, Ondine says, didn't she? She knew I'd do something like this. She knew you were afraid, I correct. Afraid of losing control, afraid of being left with nothing. She hoped you'd choose differently, but she loved you enough to give you a second chance anyway. I'll give you 24 hours to retain counsel, I said. Review this with anyone you choose. She shook her head once. I don't need a lawyer to understand what I did, she said, or what this costs. Ondine signs the settlement. Her signature looks nothing like her usual confident script. It looks like a child's handwriting. I witness it. Dr. Reyes returns to notarize it. The whole process takes 4 minutes. At 11:30, we sit in the kitchen. Me, Virgil, Dr. Reyes. Ondine left 20 minutes ago in a taxi carrying nothing but her phone and the settlement copy. Virgil pours whiskey into 3 glasses. He doesn't ask if we want it, just pours. The clean sweep, he says. I look at my glass. Is it? Dr. Reyes studies me with her clinical gaze. How are you? I kept my promises, I say. Both of them. Celeste's promise to pursue justice. Celeste's promise to give Ondine mercy. Virgil raises his glass. We don't toast to anything, just drink in silence. At midnight, I drive to Walden Cottage instead of staying in the Beacon Hill house. Too many memories there tonight. Too many conversations with ghosts. The cottage is dark when I arrive. No city lights out here in Lincoln. No street lamps. Just November wind moving through the pine trees Celeste and I planted when we bought this place 15 years ago. I don't turn on many lights, just enough to navigate to the bedroom. The ceiling beams are the same ones Celeste helped me choose. Hand-hewn oak. She insisted on authenticity even though it doubled the cost. I lie down fully clothed, stare at those beams. Wait for the guilt, the regret, the weight of what I just did to my daughter. It doesn't come. I sleep within minutes, easily, without dreams. It surprises me somewhat less than it should have. Saturday morning, Arthur Brennan's office already has coffee poured when I arrive. 2 cups in bone china mugs arranged precisely on opposite sides of his conference table. Legal documents stacked in 3 neat piles between them. He doesn't ask how I am. We've worked together for 20 years. Estate planning, property transfers, the careful architecture that keeps Boston's financial professionals from leaving messes behind. He knows better than social pleasantries on a morning like this. The documents are ready, Arthur says. He's 68 wire-rimmed glasses charcoal suit that probably costs more than my monthly Walden Cottage utilities. The kind of lawyer who bills by the quarter hour and earns every cent through silence as much as speech. First stack, POA suspensions codification. The suspension clause I built into the original document, now formally recognized by Massachusetts probate court. It retroactively voids every transaction Thatcher executed during the 48-hour window. Clean surgical removal of 3 weeks of theft. This routes to Judge Morrison on Tuesday, Arthur says. He'll process it within 72 hours. Second stack, Beacon Hill title transfer. The townhouse returns to my name under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 183. The $4.2 million sale to the ghost buyer Virgil created never happened in any legal sense that matters. The property reverts as if October never occurred. Third stack account, freeze documentation. Ondine's accounts, checking savings investment portfolio, frozen pending the $1.9 million clawback. The amount Thatcher used to pay fabricated debts now recovered from the person who benefited from the fraud. The FBI forwarded their investigation. Brief, Arthur continues. Thatcher faces wire fraud, elder abuse under the Federal Elder Justice Act conspiracy. Connecticut prosecutors reopened their 2018 case based on pattern evidence. I sign where he indicates. Arthur notarizes. The coffee sits untouched between us, cooling in expensive china. What about Ondine? Arthur asks. After the 30 days, the settlement stands, criminal record but no prosecution. She leaves Boston permanently. Arthur arranges the signed documents back into their stacks. Legal instruments that work with clean precision POA suspension title transfer account freeze. Tools that cut through complexity efficiently. Until you remember, they're cutting through families, not just paperwork. Then, the precision feels different. And you? Arthur asks. I look at the coffee I haven't touched. I want to go to Kentucky. He doesn't ask why, just nods once and writes a note on his legal pad. I leave his office at 11. The financial district is quiet on Saturdays. No rush hour crowds, just empty sidewalks and glass towers reflecting November clouds. At 12:30, I sit in Café Algier, same corner table as before, same Turkish coffee I ordered when I met Tamara the first time 4 months ago, in what feels like a different century. She arrives exactly on time, sits across from me without removing her coat. I slide an envelope across the table. 3 months severance, non-taxable gift structured through a discretionary fund. It won't appear on any employment records. Tamara doesn't touch the envelope. Why? Because you lost your job helping me build a case against your employer. I lost my job because I recorded my employer committing federal crimes. Both things are true. She finally picks up the envelope, doesn't open it, just holds it like it might contain something other than money. Was I a tool? She asks. Just another instrument in your file cabinet. The recordings, the timeline documentation, the corroborating witness testimony was that all I consider lying, Consider telling her something comforting about justice and moral courage and doing the right thing. Instead, I tell her the truth. You made a choice. I say, that stopped a man who had done this before and would have done it again. She looks up. Before Connecticut 2018, different victim, same pattern. Thatcher was the consulting attorney on that case, learned the suspension window strategy there. The victim was a 72-year-old widow. Her daughter contacted me 6 weeks ago when she heard Thatcher's name associated with another elder abuse investigation. Tamara sits back, processing. That's part of why the federal case is so solid, I continue. Pattern evidence, multiple victims across state lines. The Connecticut prosecutors are reopening with Thatcher as primary target instead of the son who hired him. So I helped stop a serial predator, Tamara says slowly. Yes, but you still used me. Yes. She stands, puts the envelope in her coat pocket. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, she says. Neither do I. She leaves without drinking the coffee I ordered for her. Turkish blend 1 sugar, exactly how she takes it. I sit alone at the corner table, watch the cafe traffic, students with laptops, couples sharing pastries. Saturday afternoon normalcy that has nothing to do with elder exploitation or federal wire fraud or daughters who choose inheritance over integrity. The coffee bill comes to $8. I leave a $20 bill on the table, same as I did 3 weeks ago. The same currency that doesn't cover moral debt or ethical complications, or the question of whether stopping a predator justifies using someone who trusted you. $20 for $8 of coffee. It still doesn't cover anything. I've spent 3 months building legal instruments that worked perfectly. POA suspension clauses, UCC1 liens, FBI consent wires, evidence timelines, every tool precise and effective. But I've run out of instruments that cover more than they cost. The waitress clears Tamara's untouched cup. Thanks me for the generous tip. Doesn't know it's not generosity, it's accounting that doesn't balance. I walk out into Cambridge afternoon. November wind cuts through the streets. Somewhere Ondine is packing for permanent exile. Thatcher is consulting criminal defense attorneys. Dr. Reyes is returning to her ophthalmology practice. Virgil is releasing fabricated liens and closing ghost corporations. And I'm standing on a Cambridge sidewalk 3 states and 40 years away from Kentucky, wondering when I'll stop leaving money on tables for debts that can't be paid in dollars. Ohio moonlight spills across I-75 southbound. 6 hours into silence when the phone rings. Unrecognized number. I almost don't answer. Then remember that Ondine doesn't have reliable phone access anymore. The settlement froze her accounts, including her cellular contract. I pull onto the shoulder. Semi-trucks blast past, rocking the car with displaced air. Hello? Dad? Her voice sounds small. It's me, temporary number. I wait. I'm already gone, she says. Didn't wait the full 30 days. Left this morning. Didn't see the point in drawing it out. The highway stretches south through darkness. I'm 3 states away from Boston, heading toward a place I haven't visited since Celeste's funeral. Ondine is somewhere else entirely, calling from a number that won't exist next week. Where are you? I ask. Does it matter? No. Silence on the line. Truck noise in the background. On her end, she's on a highway too, running a parallel somewhere in the American distance. I have a question, she says finally. All right. Is Galileo still in the southern field? I wasn't expecting that. 3 weeks of legal warfare, 14 minutes of recorded incrimination, a settlement that exiled her permanently from the city where she was born, and her first question is about a horse. Oh yes, I say. Mom loved that horse. Her voice cracks on the past tense. She used to say he was the only one at Oakmont who understood her behavioral economics research, that he grazed in patterns that proved loss aversion theory. I remember Celeste standing at the southern field fence watching Galileo move between patches of grass, notebook in hand, trying to convince me that equine feeding behavior supported her paper on risk assessment and resource allocation. He's still there, I confirm. Ondine breathes into the phone, not quite crying, not quite not crying either. I'm sorry, she says. 2 words, insufficient for 3 years of calculation and theft and betrayal, but possibly sufficient for right now on 2 different highways, speaking through temporary telecommunications that cost nothing and cover even less. I know, I say. Is that enough? I watch the moonlight on Ohio farmland. I don't know yet. Will you ever know? Ask me again in a year. The line goes quiet. A year, 365 days, enough time to know if forgiveness is possible or if some doors stay half open forever. Enough time for her to build something that doesn't require stealing from her father. Enough time for me to sleep through nights without checking account balances. Maybe. Okay, Undine says finally. 1 year. I'll call from whatever number I have then. She hangs up. I sit on the Ohio shoulder for 10 minutes, then merge back into southbound traffic and drive through the night without stopping. 14 hours after leaving Cambridge, Oakmont's gates emerge from Kentucky fog. 5:47 Monday morning. The sky is that pre-dawn gray that makes everything look like a photograph from before color film existed. The entrance sign, Oakmont Estate, established 1987, is exactly where Celeste positioned it 37 years ago when she bought these 216 acres with money she earned designing retirement portfolios for people who would never own horses. Ray Fletcher stands by the maintenance barn, coffee mug in hand. He's 53, weathered in the way that comes from 15 years of Kentucky outdoor work, the kind of quiet that Celeste valued more than conversation. He nods when he sees my car. I cut the engine, step out into air that smells nothing like Boston. No salt, no harbor exhaust, just grass and earth, and the particular scent of 37 horses distributed across fields, designed by someone who understood that animals need space to be what they are. Morning, Mr. Hewitt, Ray says. Ray. I close the car door. Southern Field, the same spot she always kept him. He doesn't ask why I'm here. Doesn't ask about the 3-year absence or the pre-dawn arrival or the Massachusetts license plates. Just points toward the access road that leads to the pasture where Celeste spent more hours than any other location on the property. I drive the quarter-mile to the Southern Field gate. Park. Get out. The fog is thicker here, rolling across November grass in patterns that might or might not prove behavioral economics theories. Somewhere in the gray distance, I can see Galileo's dark shape. I reach for my sunglasses out of habit, the performance prop I've worn for 3 months. Then I stop. Drop them in my pocket instead. Permanently. The fog tastes different from Boston air, grass and earth instead of salt and exhaust. Celeste's choice instead of mine. She bought this place over my objections, said she needed somewhere that wasn't about Federal Reserve operations or portfolio management or the careful cultivation of professional reputation, somewhere that was just hers. I walk to the fence. 50 yards away, Galileo lifts his head. He's 17 now, was 5 when Celeste bought him, 12 when she died. Old enough to remember the woman who stood here most mornings with coffee and notebooks, watching him prove or disprove academic theories about risk and reward. He looks at me across the pasture, holds the gaze for 3 full seconds, then returns to grazing as if the question was asked and answered. Celeste used to say horses know who belongs, that they can sense intention in history, and whether someone is worth their attention. I never believed her thought it was romantic anthropomorphism masking animal behavior patterns. But Galileo just looked at me and decided I could stay. Celeste would say that's exactly correct. Monday morning, Kentucky sun clears the eastern ridgeline, and Virgil Blanchard is already on the porch reading yesterday's Lexington Herald leader with coffee I didn't make. He flew in late Sunday night. I didn't ask him to come. He came anyway. Made a pot, he says, not looking up from the paper. Mugs are where they've always been. I pour coffee that tastes like someone who learned to brew it in field offices and never upgraded. Sit in the chair across from him. The porch overlooks the southern pasture, where Galileo is already grazing in patterns that may or may not prove behavioral economics theories. There are Thatcher's angling for a plea, Virgil says. Connecticut prosecutor unsealed the old case. Pattern evidence makes it solid. Federal sentencing guidelines put him at 12 to 15 years minimum. I nod, drink the terrible coffee. Undine cleared out of her Boston address. Virgil continues. Forwarding information went to a P.O. box in a city I won't tell you unless you ask. Don't tell me. Figured. We sit in silence. The newspaper rustles. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnies. Ray Fletcher's truck passes on the access road, heading toward the northern barn. Virgil folds the paper, looks at me directly. What's next for you? I consider the question. 3 years of planning, 3 months of execution, 3 days of confrontation. And now, the morning after sitting on a porch with coffee and questions about what comes after justice. I'm going to fix the east fence, I say. Celeste always said it needed fixing. Virgil studies me for 3 seconds, then nods once and returns to his paper. He flies back to Boston that afternoon. I drive him to the Lexington airport in silence. We shake hands at the departure curb. He doesn't say goodbye, just picks up his overnight bag and walks into the terminal like a man who finished a job and has others waiting. I drive back to Oakmont, park by the Northern Oak, the big one that's older than Kentucky statehood, the one where Celeste is buried. No headstone yet. She didn't want one. Said the tree was marker enough for anyone who needed to find her. I stand at the base. Remember the first night we spent here, 22 years ago, 2002. The house wasn't finished, just framing and subflooring, and the smell of fresh lumber. We slept in sleeping bags on bare plywood, in what would eventually become the master bedroom. Celeste couldn't sleep, too excited. Kept getting up to look out the unfinished windows at the pastures we just purchased. Come see, she said at 2 in the morning. I joined her. Young Galileo, 5 years old, then just arrived from the breeding farm, was galloping across the southern field, under stars so bright they looked fake. Promise me something, Celeste said. What promise we'll be buried here when it's time. Both of us, under the old oak. I looked at her. She was serious. Standing in an unfinished house in Kentucky, watching a horse run circles under starlight, already planning her death. I promise, I said. She smiled, satisfied. Good. Now we actually own it. 22 years ago, she made me promise. 3 years ago, she died under that oak, exactly where she wanted. Today, I'm choosing to stay. What is ownership if not the promises you keep after the person who extracted them is gone? I walk back to the porch, sit in the chair Virgil vacated, look out at the land Celeste bought over my objections. She was right. She usually was. And here's the part where I tell you what this story is actually about. Because it's not about revenge. Not really. It's about preparation. This is my story. The lesson isn't that I destroyed my daughter's life and feel fine about it, though I sleep well enough. The lesson is that I fixed my paperwork before the crisis arrived. Listen carefully. Fix your paperwork today. Not tomorrow, not when you feel sick or old or diminished. Today when things are pristine and the exercise feels paranoid. Meet your estate attorney before you need one. Understand power of attorney springing provisions. Know the difference between durable and limited. Know what suspension clauses are and how to build them. Know who can witness your signature and who can't. Know your state's probate laws. Title your assets correctly. Understand joint tenancy versus tenancy in common. Know what transfer on death means. Know which accounts are probate exempt and which aren't. Trust no one with authority you haven't audited. Not your children, not your spouse, not your lawyer. Authority without oversight is an invitation written in your own signature. Do this when you're healthy, when you're sharp, when you can read the fine print and understand the implications. Do it when your children aren't desperate yet. When your spouse hasn't started calculating inheritance. When the people who love you still love you more than they love your assets. Do the paperwork before the phone rings. Because if you wait until you need it, it's too late. If you wait until you're scared, you've already lost. If you wait until someone starts asking helpful questions about your estate plans, the trap is already built. I am 60 years old. My wife is buried under the North Oak. My daughter is somewhere I don't know the address of yet. And maybe in a year I'll ask, and maybe I won't. Thatcher Garrett is facing federal prison for crimes he committed using authority I granted. And Oakmont is mine. Every acre, every horse, every promise Celeste made me keep, every fence she said needed fixing. Mine because I did the paperwork when it felt paranoid. Mine because I built suspension clauses when everyone said they were unnecessary. Mine because I prepared for a war I hoped would never come. I set down my coffee, walked to the southern pasture fence. Galileo grazes peacefully 50 yards away, exactly where Celeste said he belonged. 3 years of planning, 3 months of execution, 3 days of confrontation. For this outcome, the only one I was willing to accept. And to you listening to my story, remember this preparation isn't paranoia. It's love. I spent 30 years building a life with Celeste, and 3 years protecting what she left behind. My mistake wasn't trusting my daughter initially, it was waiting too long to verify that trust with paperwork. Don't make that mistake. Don't wait until someone's already planning to take what you've built. The best time to protect your family is before you need protection. This dad family revenge story isn't about winning, it's about refusing to lose what matters. Every family faces tests. Some tests come from outside, but the hardest ones come from inside your own circle. When that happens, you have 2 choices: pretend everything's fine, or prepare for the possibility that it's not. I believe God gave me the clarity to see what was coming, and the strength to do what Celeste asked, save our daughter. If I could save our legacy, if I couldn't. That's what dad family revenge looks like when done right, protecting what you love, even from those you love. If this story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what you think. Did I do the right thing? Should I have handled it differently? And if you want more stories like this, please subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. Your thoughts matter here. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more to me than you know. One final note. While some details in this story have been fictionalized for privacy and storytelling, the lessons about legal preparation and family protection are very real. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.